on today's podcast, compelling kind of leadership and compelling cultures. Again, all research has told us for years and years and years, most people don't leave jobs, they leave managers, they leave teams, because when the style of leadership bark out orders, and eventually that burns people out, it turns people off, and really the research shows us that's just not what people want. We're going to focus on a few characteristics of servant leadership. We're going to be breaking down kind of the 10 characteristics of servant leadership into 3 categories. And today, the category we're going to focus on is personal awareness, listening, empathy, and healing. That's what we're going to talk about on today's podcast. Welcome back to The Thermostat with Jason Barger. If you're currently on a commute, a walk, or just a micro break in your day, glad you're making time to step back, to think, and to reflect on the next steps on your journey. I've never been more convinced the best leaders and team cultures in the world are the ones that make time to step back, breathe in good oxygen, and calibrate their thermostat. I hope today's conversation leaves you feeling grounded and inspired. Now let's dive into today's topic to engage our minds and hearts in order to authentically lead and create compelling cultures wherever we are in the world. Hey everyone, it's Jason, and welcome back to the Thermostat Podcast. We are in season 6 and well over 100 episodes, which is so awesome, exciting, and thank you. I guess I'll just start out by saying thank you for today. Thank you for everybody that continues to listen, to the folks that have been with this from the very beginning. So excited that you continue to be part of this journey, and also obviously the messages and spirit of this podcast continues to add value and contribute to where you are in your life and work. So glad that you're still with us. And to anybody who's new right now to the podcast, jumping in and joining in, so glad to have you, and so glad. It's exciting to see this podcast continue to grow, spread. It's just really, really awesome. So thanks to everybody that is new to the podcast, and I invite you to go back and listen to a lot of the past episodes. So much great stuff involved, great conversations with amazing people that inspire me, and also micro podcasts of nuggets and topics that I think you'll find valuable and inspire you, hopefully. These have been things that I've been thinking about, things that make sense to me and my heart and my mind, and so I hope they resonate with you as well. As always, my commitment to you and to anybody listening is that this is a place, a space in your day, in your week, in your own practice, a place for you to be able to step back, to think, to be filled with positive mojo, positive concepts and ideas about your own leadership, the culture of that you're creating with the people around you, your own focus, thinking about kind of your mission and life and work bigger than yourself. So I'm more convinced of this than ever. I continue to see this in every team and organization that I'm lucky to support, every event that I speak at, everything that I am lucky to be a part of in my work and in my life, is that authentic leadership is needed. Authentic leadership that cares for, brings out the gifts of people, that helps people engage and feel alive, to contribute their own strengths and gifts to something bigger than themselves. That's needed more than ever, and to care for people. And cultures, creating intentionally team cultures around that kind of spirit is needed more than ever. So, excited to continue. Again, this podcast is an extension of those kind of thoughts and feelings, and hope this is a place that helps kind of breathe oxygen into your own practice, and certainly to the culture around you. Before we dive into today's episode, if you will do me a quick favor, will you take a minute, just 1 minute, and rate this podcast 5 stars, please? Leave a nice review. Those are the ways that it helps the algorithms help other people find this podcast, and also helps amplify the messages, helps share it further. So anytime you rate it, you leave a review, obviously every time you share it on social media, or just share it, email a friend, email a colleague, somebody, share it at your team or in your place of work, and say, hey, I think these are some conversations we ought to be a part of and we ought to be having together. So every time we do that, it helps amplify this and reach further. And that's obviously the goal of this, is to reach as far as we can and share positive messages that impact people further and further into the world. So Thank you for everybody that takes the time to do that. On the last few episodes, we've certainly been talking about, the current realities of the workplace and the workforce right now in the world. We know of the Great Resignation. Again, if you listen to past episodes not too long ago, we've been talking about the reality around this. So many different people, 30 plus million and growing every month, that have quit jobs. Why have they been quitting jobs? What are they looking for? New research continues to come out that's surveying all these people and asking, what is it you're looking for? And really what it tells us is that people are looking for meaningful cultures. They're saying more than anything, like they want a place. They don't just want a job. They want to feel like they are cared for as a human, and that the best interests of them is a part of the equation, but that they want to be a part of where they can contribute their strengths and gifts to something bigger than themselves. And so I've shared this research recently, that the research from the Center for Talent Innovation said that really there's so much wrapped up in this of employees and team members wanting to feel like they belong at work, and that how important belonging is. And they say that when people feel like they belong at work, it actually leads to higher ROI on everything else. The metrics go up, so they're more productive, they're more motivated, they're more engaged, which all of those things, lead to 3.5 times more likely to contribute their gifts and reach their fullest potentials, which again hits targets and all that. Gallup tells us that engaged employees, those that their mind and heart is engaged in their team, doesn't mean everything's perfect, but they are tuned in, they are actively engaged with the future of where the team or the organization is trying to go, the culture they're trying to create together. Those people, those employees that are engaged, their mind and their hearts, are 2 to 5 times more likely also to hit their targets for whatever their role is. They're more likely to win over teammates. They're more likely to, those organizations retain people, attract more people. They have more loyal customers. All of those metrics go up. So we know how important it is. It always has been in the world, but especially right now, engaging the minds and hearts of our people has never been more important. So we know all this, in our own minds. We know all this cognitively, and we also know that leadership, compelling kind of leadership and compelling cultures, that kind of influential, inspiring, caring leadership, often referred to as servant leadership, is key. We know this. It's key to engaging with people and serving their needs and the needs of the overall mission. So we know that cognitively, that type of leadership, again, all research has told us for years and years and years, most people don't leave jobs, they leave managers, they leave teams, because when the style of leadership or the culture that's being created within that team or within that organization is that kind of top of the pyramid, command and control type of leadership, bark out orders, and eventually that burns people out, it turns people off, and really the research shows us that's just not what people want. And so we know this cognitively. Servant leadership, the kind of compelling, influential, inspiring, caring leadership, is a key component to engaging the people on teams and throughout organizations and serving their needs and the needs of the overall mission. So on today's podcast, we're going to focus on a few characteristics of servant leadership. We're gonna again define this term a little bit more. In fact, these next 3 podcasts, we're going to break down. There's many characteristics of servant leadership, but we're going to be breaking down kind of the 10 characteristics of servant leadership into 3 categories. And today, the category we're going to focus on is personal awareness, listening, empathy, and healing. That's what we're going to talk about on today's podcast. But let's take a quick break. Let's pause for a second, and we'll be right back. Many teams and organizations right now are realizing that they need to do both. They need to engage the minds and hearts of their people in person, where everyone in the room can experience the energy of congregating together and find clarity for the road ahead. And they also need to continue to find ways to engage the minds and hearts of their people virtually, with those who are working remotely or at a distance. So, if you are in the process of planning your next team meeting, company all-hands event, conference or culture summit, and are looking for support with a powerful keynote speech, facilitated team conversations that are the currency for change, or deeper development on leadership mindset and an intentional strategy for the culture you're trying to create, I hope you'll contact us at jasonvbarger.com, jasonvbarger.com. It is my privilege and our honor to partner with great people to provide support in these areas. We want to breathe oxygen into your leaders and throughout your organization so you can set the temperature you want for your culture. We look forward to connecting with you soon. Robert K. Greenleaf is the one who gets credited for coining the term servant leadership back in the 1960s. His essay, The Essentials of Servant Leadership, introduced the ideas that this idea around this term that he was coining that resonated with so many people around the world and inspired also then the Greenleaf Center for Servant Leadership that's based out of Indianapolis. And the whole focus of the Greenleaf Center for Servant Leadership is that it studies, it teaches, and celebrates the philosophies around servant leadership. In 1998, another thing to point out is that Larry Spears, the executive director of the Greenleaf Center for Servant Leadership, he established what they referred to in all their studies and all the research and all their kind of observing of different leaders and organizations, these kind of 10 characteristics of servant leadership based on their framework of years of research. I know this, I'll just say this out front, that many have different feelings about the term servant leadership. Some really love that term and really love that terminology. And others, which I understand, many elements to the complexities of that term, that the idea of servant leadership doesn't jive with a lot of people just from that title. But what I think we can all agree on, whether you love that terminology or it doesn't sit right with you, is the spirit of this term. So the idea is what most people agree upon. And so again, if you don't get hung up on the term, if it's not something that you love, let's make sure that we're focused on kind of the idea behind it. Again, Robert K. Greenleaf is the one that kind of coined that term back in the 60s. But let's most importantly, let's focus on the idea, the concept that's at the heart of it. In this podcast series, again, this episode and the next two episodes afterwards, I'm going to be breaking down these kind of 10 characteristics that they identified in the research of servant leadership. But I'm going to be breaking them down into three core elements. So 3 different podcast episodes focused on these kind of servant leadership characteristics at play. And the 3 categories are going to be awareness, vision, and impact. And today we're going to focus on awareness. So servant leadership begins with our ability or our inability to be aware of our own thinking, feeling, and our own experiences. And so, again, if you remember past podcasts that I've done about emotional intelligence, this is really the beginning and the foundation for all leadership, but certainly for this concept of servant leadership, is that it begins with our own emotional intelligence, our ability or inability to be aware of our own thinking, feeling, and experience, and our own awareness of that. But also, it's about a deep commitment to inner strength. Servant leadership and the foundation of it, the awareness of ourself, but also this kind of deep commitment to inner strength, that we recognize that leadership often begins on the inside of recognizing not only what are we seeing and feeling, but what are we, I say this all the time, that how we think about what it means to lead is going to impact every room that we walk into. And so it begins on the inside, our own inner strength and our own development, and the idea that we as a servant leader, our awareness around our own commitment to development, developing ourself, that servant leaders are committed to their own inner work and their own development of these senses, of becoming more aware of how they're thinking and feeling, how others might be thinking and feeling, and then how do I use the kind of inner strength and my own inner development to help impact people and a mission greater than self. Servant leaders are also good listeners. Servant leaders are also good listeners. So the awareness around those, the characteristics of this that fall under this awareness category is that they're good listeners. They seek to understand others and other situations. So they seek to understand before their need to be understood. And so making sure that we understand and we define these characteristics of servant leaders is the servant leaders are good listeners, and they seek out to understand others and also seek out situations before they just jump to some kind of conclusion. They identify what is being said, what are they hearing, but also what might not be being said. To read a situation and with a person or a particular meeting or a particular situation they run into, what are the things that are being said and what might be left unsaid? What's not being communicated that might be at play? They listen for the melody line of the messages being delivered. So what's that kind of through line? What's that melody line in the song, that the messages that are being delivered for an individual person that they might be coaching or trying to develop, for a team, for a situation? What's kind of the melody line of the messages that they're listening to and that they're hearing? Servant leaders are also, they enter their relationships and their situations with that kind of social awareness. Again, this is the other side of emotional intelligence. If emotional intelligence has two sides to it, our own personal awareness, our own individual awareness of ourselves, how we're feeling, how we're thinking, what we see, and then how we calibrate our own response, our own thermostat to respond with a behavior or an action. That's the personal side of it. But it also has the social awareness, which means that we have a desire and to see socially, how might somebody else be thinking and feeling and experiencing. And then we have a desire to have empathy for others. Servant leaders have this desire to try to empathize for what somebody else might be thinking and feeling and seeing, and then calibrating that behavioral response to help meet the need of the person, but also the mission greater than self. So servant leaders, they establish these relationships with that kind of social awareness, and they assume positive intent in others. They assume positive intent in others, but also are able to have courageous conversations to understand another point of view. So oftentimes with servant leadership, I want to make sure that this is clear, is that sometimes people can think of it in their head that servant leadership is just about being nice or kind, or servant leaders kind of live in the clouds and they're soft. They're not afraid to have difficult conversations. And the reality is the best servant leaders that I've experienced, that I've studied, that I've been lucky to be around in my life, they assume positive intent in others. They are very clear and firm on the vision and where we're trying to go. They're absolutely deeply committed to developing the people around them, but they're not soft. They're willing to have courageous conversations, to understand another point of view, but then also to be able to talk about and bring it back to what is the mission at hand and what are we trying to accomplish together. So they don't shy away from courageous conversations. In fact, they see that being willing to have courageous conversations is the currency for change and development. So servant leaders also understand the power of healing and understand that space, time, and growth is often needed for internal healing and also for the healing within people and within groups. So in the midst of those courageous conversations, another characteristic of servant leaders is this characteristic of healing, that not only are they empathetic and are they good listeners, and again, are they willing and able to enter into courageous conversations, but servant leaders often understand that there's an element of healing that takes place and is needed for all of us, that different situations, different people, even teams and past experiences, sometimes we need some time, some space, in order for growth to take place. And so they name and honor the ways in which they hope and aim to heal, and realize that, again, development, and oftentimes when we have something that hasn't gone our way personally, or an obstacle or challenge we're facing individually, or that we've faced as a team or as an organization, that oftentimes that sometimes we just need a little bit of space for time to heal. And the reality is that's where growth takes place. And so, again, servant leadership is not soft, but it is intentional. and begins with an internal spirit and an external desire to serve a mission greater than self. So, we're talking about this kind of, on this episode, we're talking about these characteristics of awareness, and making sure that we're thinking about the fact that it begins with our own awareness of ourself, what we might be thinking and feeling, and also then awareness of other people around us. Some of the characteristics are that we're good, that a servant leader would be a good listener, would be empathetic for somebody else and trying to understand the viewpoint and the needs of others, and then a willingness to be able to have those courageous conversations and also provide a little bit of time and space for healing and growth to take place, realizing that growth in us individually or as an organization is not a drive-through experience, that oftentimes we grow and develop over time. So servant leadership is not soft, but is intentional and begins with that internal spirit and external desire to serve a mission greater than self. And over the next 3 episodes, I'll be talking about these 3 categories of servant leadership. Again, today we're focusing on awareness and the beginning of servant leadership and our ability to be able to listen to our own body, our own feelings, our own thoughts, and be aware of that, but also to be able to have empathy for others and listen to other points of view, and then be courageous enough to enter into dialogue and provide some time and awareness around what healing might need to take place. And so those are the characteristics we focused on today. And on the next 2 episodes, we're going to focus on the categories of vision, how servant leadership and servant leaders have vision. And then lastly, we'll focus on impact, that servant leaders are absolutely looking for impact and outcomes. And so some of the characteristics and actions that we're going to highlight are all wrapped up in kind of these 10 characteristics of servant leadership, and we're breaking it down into these 3 categories: awareness, vision, and impact. So some questions to ponder this week. What are you aware of that you are thinking, feeling, and experiencing right now in your life and work? What are you aware of? Again, we want to practice these things, and we're taking some smaller bites at a time of these kind of 3 different categories of servant leadership. So what are you aware of that you are thinking, feeling, and experiencing right now in your life and work? Who or what needs more listening and empathy to better understand? In your life and work, who and what needs more listening and empathy to better understand? And lastly, what healing might need to take place for future growth? What healing might need to take place for future growth? Remember, calibrating our own personal thermostat, which again, this is what we're talking about and doing on this podcast every episode, is our own awareness of our own thinking, feeling, and acting. Our own awareness around that is then about calibrating our response, calibrating our thermostat. What is our behavior and our response going to be based on what we're thinking and feeling and seeing? And then what do we see in other people? And what response is needed to help create that culture that we're aiming for? We are the thermostats, and our own internal temperature sets a temperature externally for those around us based on our awareness, our response, and our behaviors. So on the next upcoming episodes, again, we're going to dive even deeper into these characteristics of servant leadership. And today we focused on awareness, but in the next 2, we're going to focus on vision and impact. So stay tuned. Remember, the best leaders, teams, and cultures on the planet stimulate progress by recalibrating their thermostat, recalibrating and aligning leaders around the culture they're trying to create tomorrow together. Thank you for listening to today's podcast, and I hope the messages and questions stimulate positive change along your path. As always, if these messages resonate with you and add value to your life, I hope you'll help amplify them throughout the world. Please rate, comment, and share on whatever podcast or social media platform you're using, and share this podcast with the people in your life or work who should be part of these conversations. That way, this spirit does, in fact, spread. If these messages or developing leaders and culture would be helpful to you and your organization, please contact us at jasonvbarger.com, jasonvbarger.com. And remember, we are all ambassadors for the culture we want to create in our life and work. We have to own the vision we want to be a part of. The future of leadership is you, is me, is us. Be a thermostat.